What's going on, everybody? Let me know if you can hear me and see me okay. Hope everybody's doing okay. It's been a little bit quiet recently on the weather front, but we are back with some severe weather today. Thankfully, it is looking like a lower end event, but still, some folks are under the gun, and it's an interesting setup today. So we're going to take a look at it in depth. Awesome. Looks like everybody can hear and see me. We'll wait a couple more minutes, let a few more folks stream in. I know it's an early one, but I definitely wanted to do this video. Haven't had a lot of content on the channel in a while, so I wanted to get up a forecast discussion, do a live one, and then I'll be getting back to work on the on some forecasting or some breakdown videos from this year. The June 20th one was a big one, so that kind of took it out of me. So I wanted to take a little break, had some other projects to work on, but we will be back with some more breakdowns here soon. Grace, awesome. The Omega stuff for today. That should be definitely helpful. Yeah, a little bit quiet. Yeah, it's up pretty loud, guys, so check on your end. The mic's up pretty loud, so it might be on your end. But I just turned it up a little bit, so let me know if that's better. Seems okay. All right. We'll wait maybe another minute, and then we'll get started here. We'll just go through the setup today. We do have a setup in a couple days on Sunday. It is a marginal risk along the eastern seaboard down into Florida. Not going to touch on that too much today, just kind of waiting and seeing how that evolves. If that becomes a more robust threat, we'll be back with another video. But we're going to focus on today's setup in this video in particular. Constance, thank you so much for the super chat. Much appreciated. Always appreciate your support. Xavier, feeling better. The knee is definitely hurting a little bit. I iced it up last night after the live stream for Discord, but definitely can feel it. Definitely going to take a few days off and recuperate. But thankfully, it wasn't too bad of an injury, so should be back up in full in a few days. What events speak for themselves that don't need a case study? Well, I'm gonna do a case study on those anyway. Got some end of April stuff, and then the mid-May stuff. April 27th, 28th, May 16th, May 18th, and then some of the June stuff. All right, so let's go ahead and dive right in. It's 9:35 right now, so we'll let folks filter in here, but we'll get started. Again, as always, if you have any questions specific to this setup, I'll be happy to answer those, but hold those till the end. It's just easier for me to see them if we just do them all at once toward the end instead of having to look over at the comments during the stream. So hold those to the end. If you have any other questions not about this setup, you can send me an email, but I want to focus on this setup in particular in this video so people get the information that they need. All right, so this is our SPC outlook for today. This is we've had this kind of risk for a couple days, hasn't really changed much over the last few days. Small, slight risk from central and southern Kentucky into middle Tennessee, including places like Bowling Green, Nashville, Franklin, Murfreesboro, in that level 2 out of 5 slight risk. And then we have a marginal risk extending from really southern Ohio, far southern Ohio, western West Virginia, all the way down into the Gulf Coast states, much of Alabama, western Georgia, in that marginal risk as well. We do have an all hazards risk for today, 2% in a couple of different areas. So we have 2% from basically the Alabama-Tennessee border up into central Kentucky, again, including Bowling Green, Nashville, Murfreesboro, Franklin, and then a separate 2% down here across southern Alabama into southwest Georgia. That's going to include Columbus, Dothan, and areas down there, down toward Montgomery in that 2% area as well. So low-end risk for a tornado or two today. There are some flies in the ointment today that may preclude a really higher-end tornado risk, but there is a chance for a brief tornado or two from this setup. Damaging wind at a 15% within the slight risk region there across Kentucky and Tennessee, with a 5% risk surrounding that. And then a large hail risk. Could see some isolated instances of large hail, especially for any storms that are behind the cold front or elevated. Some of the thermodynamics don't really favor large hail production today, but there could be a few instances of isolated large hail with today's setup. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of our upper air data. So this is the 500 millibar map. So not a ton going on, not a real robust trough by any means, but we are watching this feature right here. It's across the eastern plains, impinging upon the Midwest right now. This is going to continue to dig to the east-southeast a little bit today into the mid-south, and that's going to be our main sort of feature that will drive this setup. Again, it's not very high amplitude, and given the trajectory of this trough coming down from kind of the northwest, we're not really going to see robust surface low development with this setup at all. We already have seen a surface low develop, but it's all the way up here out across the Great Lakes moving into Canada. Here is our surface pattern, and you can see where that surface low is. Fairly deep surface low up here in the Great Lakes region, but down here we're not really going to see any type of organized surface cyclogenesis or anything, just kind of the trailing cold front from this surface low. You can see the pressure tongue there. Cold front down into the southern plains. That's going to sweep off to the east, and that will be our main initiating boundary for storms in this setup for today. Not a super fast-moving cold front by any means, but there should be at least decently strong forcing along it to support severe weather. And that, I will clarify, is going to be our main initiating boundary for this, the main portion of the setup where the slight risk is Kentucky and Tennessee. Down to the south across Alabama and Georgia and maybe southeast Mississippi, that is going to be a little bit of a separate regime, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. So overall, not a super impressive event from a synoptic standpoint, and that's going to lead to a little bit of a lower end event. Usually with these more robust setups, you want to see that surface low a little bit closer to the event, or closer to the area of interest, and our surface pattern a little bit more organized, and our trough a little bit more robust. But today that's not going to be the case so much. So a lower end event, but still plenty of ingredients in place to support a severe weather risk for today. Let's take a look at our low-level jet. We do see with that low-level cyclone centered up there in Canada, very expansive plume of low-level jet, 30, 35, 40 plus knots of flow all the way from eastern Canada down into the southeast. As you might expect, though, with this surface low moving, or with this low-level cyclone moving off to the northeast during the day, we're going to kind of see a little bit of a waning of the low-level jet in southern portions of the risk area. I'll kind of zoom this out, or extend this out a few hours here, and you can see that the main plume of low-level jet is going to be displaced off to the north. Those strongest winds, those purples up there, all the way up into the kind of northeastern U.S., stretching a little bit down into the mid-south, maybe the Ohio River Valley, but overall down to the south. The farther south you go, low-level winds will be on the weaker side. So one of the reasons that a tornado risk is not all that evident today is because we're just going to see somewhat muted low-level shear. In some areas, we will perhaps see enough low-level shear for a tornado risk, but overall, that strongest low-level shear is going to be displaced from our strongest instability, and really any of the instability that's going to be noted with this setup. But still, we should see enough of a low-level shear, enough low-level shear maintain itself across the outlook area, at least especially northern portions of the outlook area, to support a severe risk with perhaps a low-end tornado threat. Here is our surface map at the moment. Let's see if this can refresh here. There we go. So this is what we've got going on right now. We see 60s dew points all the way up into western Tennessee, far southwest Kentucky, just roughly drawing in our 60 dew point isodrosotherm there, something like that, and then down across the southeast, maybe something like that. So our moisture is returning inland. We have seen that southwesterly flow at the surface try to pull this moisture northward. Again, if we had a more robust surface flow a little bit farther south, we'd see a bit more efficient moisture return. But it is the winter time. It is fall, winter, so we don't need 70 dew points to get the job done. So we are going to see enough moisture. Already have 60s dew points up, creeping into our area of interest there, and that's going to continue to make its way off to the north and east for our setup today. 60s dew points probably up to the Ohio River at best, I would suspect. And of course, increasing moisture with southern extent. So up here in Kentucky and Tennessee, upper 50s to low 60s dew points down here across the secondary area of interest, out across Alabama, southeast Mississippi, southwest Georgia. We may very well see those mid-60s dew points become commonplace across that area. So it definitely looks like instability will be stronger with southern extent, but again, shear is stronger with northern extent. So a little bit of a trade-off here. We're not seeing that a great overlap of the parameters in this setup to warrant a higher severe weather risk. But overall, fairly impressive look here for fall and winter. We should have plenty of moisture to support some severe threat with the setup today, but there are other issues with the setup. To see some of those other issues, let's take a look at some soundings from across the region. This is Jackson, Mississippi from 12Z, so this station right there. And you can see not really anything all that impressive at this point. Very limited thermodynamics here to start the day. Very limited lapse rates aloft. You see the maximum lapse rate here in that 500 to kind of 600 millibar layer, 5.9 degrees Celsius per kilometer. So very limited lapse rates with the current state of the atmosphere. Now that's expected to change as the trough kind of swings through. We'll get a little bit of colder air in there. We'll have destabilization through the day. Speaking of that, our satellite, we do see a good bit of cloud cover, but some broken heating out across these areas. So we should see some heating. We should see some moistening of the low and mid levels through the day as that moisture continues to pull up off to the north. But for now, we're gonna need a lot of work, and at least the models are showing that we are going to see some improvement through the day. But kinematics are going to be, thermodynamics are going to be a little bit perhaps of an issue with today's setup. Again, better instability farther south where the better moisture is, but we're a little bit farther removed from the trough, so a little bit less favorable lapse rates aloft down to the south, which may be a fly in the ointment with getting actual storms to fire and persist down there. And the SPC mentioned that in their outlook today, that convective initiation farther south is a little bit in question, and it's probably because of the weaker kinematics or weaker thermodynamics farther south, and just the fact that forcing is overall weak. So not much to glean from these soundings at this point. Here's Birmingham. We're kind of out of the warm sector here. Much of the same up at Nashville, well north of the warm sector at this point. Again, not a ton to glean from these morning soundings. Here's Slidell, Louisiana, a little bit farther south of Jackson, and we start to see a little bit of instability already in the profile. And again, this will make its way off to the north, but fairly skinny instability, fairly weak lapse rates aloft, a little bit of an inversion right there, just below 700 millibars. So all in all, thermodynamics may be the limiting factor with this setup. And so, but we'll take a look at some forecast soundings here in just a second. Let's take a look at the NAM. So here is the NAM. You see at 500 millibars here, this is going to be where our trough is as it was initialized this morning on this run of the NAM. So this again is going to swing off to the east-southeast during the day, going to start to impinge upon the mid-south by the afternoon. And right about here at 0Z, which is going to be 6 p.m. Central, you see the axis of the trough out here from Illinois southward into the Mississippi River region. And so right out ahead of that's going to be our main focus for severe weather. And of course, given where this trough is, the forcing is going to be stronger in that slight risk area. And that's why we're going to see perhaps the greatest threat for severe weather in that region, because we have stronger forcing, stronger deep layer shear, better chance of seeing some supercells develop along the cold front there. And farther south, a little bit more of a glancing blow. We're well removed. Again, not a very high amplitude trough at all. So a fairly confined area within the exit region of the trough. Down to the south across southern Alabama, southern Mississippi, southern Georgia. Not really all that impressive as far as forcing goes. So this is going to be more of a warm advection regime. We're going to have to rely on that warm advection, the transport of moisture into the region. That can be a forcing mechanism in and of itself, although it is going to be a little bit of a question. You still usually need some type of synoptic forcing for ascent from a trough or some type of shortwave moving through the warm sector, and that is going to be in question today. And so that's why we're really that's why we haven't seen higher probabilities for severe weather farther south. It's simply just the forcing is not looking all that impressive down to the south to really allow the storms that fire on that warm advection regime to persist and become robust. But still, we should have enough instability and perhaps enough forcing from warm advection itself to maybe allow for an updraft or two to become robust. And if that's the case, then the full severe weather potential will be realized down there. But that's certainly a question at this point. Moving through the nighttime hours, that trough moves through pretty quickly into tomorrow. They have removed severe probabilities for tomorrow. They had a marginal risk out here across the Gulf Coast states. That is no longer. And then for Sunday, secondary trough moves tries to take shape. Nice positively tilted trough. And we could see some low-end severe on Sunday. But for our setup today, definitely forcing is focused farther north across Kentucky into Tennessee, which is why the highest severe probabilities are there. Let's go down to the surface real quick and show you the progression of the surface low. Again, very well removed from our area of interest, which is not necessarily a deal breaker, but usually you'd want to see some type of more organized surface pattern in your area of interest. Here is our surface low at 12Z as it was initialized on the NAM, a cold front stretching through the pressure tongue down here into the southern plains. And that is going to be our initiating boundary for storms today in the northern portions of the setup. So as we go through the day, that surface low shifts off to the east a little bit with the trailing cold front moving through. Here we are at 21Z, 3 p.m. Central Time. Surface low is there. Cold front stretching down to the south. And again, we're kind of just dealing with the trailing front. Winds out of the south-southwest, so slightly veered low-level flow, another factor that's going to decrease the low-level shear altogether, especially with our 850 millibar winds out of the southwest as well. We are going to see a little bit of strengthening of the winds as you go up in the lowest levels of the atmosphere. But as far as strong low-level shear for a tornado threat, it's going to be on the lower side because of the kind of veered surface winds and overall somewhat disorganized surface pattern. In all of your big severe weather setups out across the mid-south and southeast, you really see a nicely organized surface pattern. Your boundaries are evident. They're they're closer to your area of interest. Oftentimes a secondary surface low will develop. So not looking all that favorable for a robust tornado risk with this setup, given the somewhat veered low-level flow. We continue through the evening, and that kind of maintains itself. Surface winds are also quite weak, given a much farther proximity of the surface low, that surface low all the way up in eastern Canada, so we're not really seeing really strong low-level flow without secondary surface cyclogenesis down here. So let's zoom in a little bit, and we'll take a look at how our moisture is going to evolve through the day. So you can see the 60s dew points out here at 12Z across East Texas, Louisiana, southern Arkansas, southern Mississippi. Those do quickly get pulled off to the north out across our area of interest. Here we are at 21Z, and the College of DuPage sectors are a little bit wonky here, so I'll just zoom out to the full map. So again, those 60s dew points, as progged by the NAM, make their way up to about the Ohio River in western Kentucky, southern Indiana, and that plume kind of extends down to the south. And so that is a little bit farther west than what the SPC outlook is showing. The main moist axis is out here across western Kentucky and Tennessee. So even if you're just west of the slight risk today, I would keep that in mind, that you may see some storms fire up out here to the west that may become robust before they even move into that slight risk, which is the highest risk for severe weather today. So, but we do see, again, plenty of moisture this time of year for a severe threat. Farther north, we do see those 50s dew points up into Indiana and Ohio, so maybe a low-end severe risk up there. With the cold front moving through, that should be more of a linear nature to those storms. And down to the south, the trailing portion of the front, not quite moving as fast, not quite as strong of a gradient down there as well. And so, we very well could see... Again, it's a cold front that's forcing these storms, so frontal forcing by nature tends to be fairly strong. but not a very strong temperature gradient across the front. Now, this is the NAM, so take it with a grain of salt. Let's just look at the GFS real quick. And you can see not a very strong temperature gradient across this front, which is a good sign for somewhat weaker forcing along the frontal zone. SPC thinks that things are going to go upscale pretty quickly along the cold front. Given that the cold front's not all that intense as far as the temperature gradient goes, it's not going to be super, super fast moving. I would suspect that we do have a window for discrete storms today out across this area. So, but again, we're looking at all the factors here. The orientation of the front is not all that favorable with our shear vectors. So there, I've drawn in our front there. Let's take a look at our shear vectors. And actually, we do see a little bit of perpendicularity with respect to that cold front as far as the shear vectors go. Still not a very big angle between the shear vectors and the orientation of the front. So we're kind of getting mixed signals as far as a storm mode, as far as storm mode goes. So I would suspect that we do have a window for some semi-discrete storms initially across this area, and eventually things will congeal into more of a clustered, more linear mode. But I do see a threat for some semi-discrete storms for maybe a couple hours this afternoon into the early evening, as storms are perhaps at their most robust. And of course, we know discrete storms have a better chance of producing those higher-end severe hazards. But if we do see a more linear mode, then damaging winds could be a risk, and that's why the SPC has that slight risk there. The damaging wind threat is at a 15%, which is a slight risk equivalent threat there. So SPC sees the main risk as damaging winds. Let's take a look at a couple soundings here from across the region. We'll start at 21Z. We'll take one here in kind of western Tennessee. And then we'll take one down here. So you see the dichotomy here. We have our tongue of moisture up here across Tennessee and Kentucky, and then our higher dew points situated here across southern Mississippi, southern Alabama. So those two regimes you can kind of clearly see in the dew point field. Let's take a sounding here from far southeast Mississippi near kind of the Hattiesburg area and see what we have going on. So this is at 21Z up in western Tennessee. Decent instability. You can see a pretty big change from what we saw this morning on our observed soundings. This is the NAM, probably a little bit overdone as far as instability goes, but 1,500 joules per kilogram. I would suspect more in the 1,000 joules per kilogram range. Decent lapse rates aloft. We've seen some cooling as the cooler air with the trough comes in, steepens lapse rates aloft a little bit. Moist layer is quite a bit deeper than it was this morning. So all in all, if this instability profile were to become realized, or were to realize, then we'd see a better chance for more robust storms. Although our wind profile not all that favorable. You see the veered low-level flow here. Surface winds out of the southwest. Again, the low-level jet much more displaced off to the north, maybe just very much at the trailing end of that low-level jet, about 30 knots of flow at about 1 kilometer off the surface. So not really a ton of low-level shear to speak of here. You can see that low-level hodograph, not all that curved at all. But we do have lengthy hodographs, effective bulk shear over 45 knots here, so plenty of shear in the deep layer to organize storms. Would just likely be more of a damaging wind and large hail threat with those storms. Now let's take a look down to the south. Again, this is our warm advection regime. We're well ahead of the frontal zone here. I'll draw that in for you. So our frontal zone kind of right in this vicinity here. And you can see that we are well ahead of that frontal zone here. So this is going to be, again, purely a warm advection regime. Any confluence bands in the open warm sector we'll have to watch out for. Perhaps a little bit of confluence here out across southern Mississippi and southern Alabama to help storms perhaps get going. Again, the synoptic forcing is really weak this far south, so we're relying pretty much solely on warm advection to get the job done. Will that be enough to allow storms to become mature? That's a big, big if. But if storms can become mature, we do have a parameter space in place that would favor an all hazards risk, maybe a brief tornado or two, and maybe a damaging wind gust or two. We do see some warmer temperatures aloft, some kind of weaker lapse rates aloft. You see that 850 to 500 millibar lapse rate right at about 6, and that does have a little bit to do with this tiny warm nose there, which could be in and of itself a negative factor there. But you see just the slope of the temperature profile, not all that steep. Usually you want to see those real steep lapse rates aloft to really bump up the instability with our event and allow updrafts to become intense. Just not really the case here. Our instability profile just kind of on the skinny side, which is never usually a good thing with a warm advection regime. You want there to be a good amount of instability in the warm sector without any of those Cape robber type deals in the thermodynamic profile, and we're not really seeing that with this particular profile here in southern Mississippi. We do have pretty strong low-level instability, 3 Cape approaching 200 joules per kilogram. That's probably on the high side, but low-level lapse rates certainly are on the steeper side. We see 0 to 3 kilometer lapse rates at about 7.3 degrees Celsius per kilometer. So steep low-level lapse rates, that could help those updrafts get on their way upward and becoming robust. The question is, will they be able to really meet their ceiling, meet their full potential in this kind of, excuse me, in this kind of somewhat limited thermodynamic environment above that? But certainly strong low-level instability there. So if any storms can get going, they have the chance of becoming supercells, given still strong deep layer shear, 40 plus knots of effective bulk shear. And we have a little bit more curvature there in the low levels of the hodograph, a little bit more veering of those winds in the low levels of the atmosphere. You see more southerly low-level flow progged by the NAM across southern Mississippi, southern Alabama. So that could lead to more of a low-end tornado risk than areas farther north. Let's go to 0Z. This is going to be as storms are ongoing. So we'll take one there once again, western Tennessee, and then we'll take one again down here across kind of the Mississippi-Alabama border region there. So here we are farther north, again, fairly straight line hodograph, strong deep layer shear to organize storms, but those winds in the low levels very unidirectional, really unidirectional all the way across all the way up into the atmosphere, meaning more of a damaging wind risk. But we do see enough instability to support decently intense convection. And again, pending storm mode, if we do see a more semi-discrete supercell mode, we could see a few more instances of large hail. But damaging winds look to be the main threat with this mode up here if this instability can be realized. Down to the south, again, this is a fairly favorable looking kinematic profile given more veering winds with height here out across this region of southern Alabama, southern Mississippi. A little bit more curvature in the hodographs down here, about 170 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity. But again, that instability profile leaves a lot to be desired. Very skinny thermo profile here. Here by 0Z. So it's kind of a coin flip. You really do want to see more robust thermodynamics with these warm advection regimes. So you can allow those updrafts to become robust on their own just based on warm advection without synoptic forcing for ascent. I do question whether we'll see updrafts become persistent and intense. But again, if they do, they will have a chance for an outside chance for a tornado or two and maybe some damaging wind gusts down there. Then we move off into the evening. I would suspect convection to continue through the evening and nighttime hours, given that we'll have instability that remains. 3Z, they'll move across Kentucky and Tennessee. And then we'll maintain that chance for maybe some prefrontal supercells there out across these areas. So here we are. Again, this is going to be for that kind of central Tennessee area. 3Z, we have enough instability to support the maintenance of storms, but as far as being really robust, tornado producers, probably not going to be the case here. And then down there across the Gulf Coast regions, still maintaining that somewhat decent low-level shear, but again, instability on the weaker side, especially in the low levels now. We've seen on the NAM certainly progging a decrease in low-level instability by the evening. And Grace, thank you for sending the Omega stuff. Definitely looks quite low end from that. So mostly a wind risk. Yeah. So the Omega project tools definitely on board with our assessment that it's just not going to be an overall super robust event, given the flies in the ointment that we discussed. So again, Grace, thank you for sending those to me there. Let's take a look at some of our cams here. So this is the 12Z HER. So you see not much through the day. By about midday, early afternoon or so, we start to get some more robust updrafts along and ahead of the cold front there across western Tennessee and Kentucky. Again, not really all that intense. You see kind of a clustered mode right off the bat. I suspect we'll have somewhat of a window for discrete supercells or discrete storms. In general, you see some more discrete updrafts here. But overall, really nothing all that intense. You see down to the south, we do see some attempts at more robust updrafts here across southern Alabama. But overall, we don't really see them become persistent and intense, just given those thermo issues across that area. Let's take a look at some other ones here. The WRF ARW. So pretty much on the same page. Updrafts start getting going there by early afternoon. Kind of a clustered mode. Some attempts at maybe some semi-discrete updrafts in here. But down to the south you see as well, not much going on as far as prefrontal convection. We do see some attempts maybe they're around 23 to 0Z, so 5 to 6 p.m. But again, they're not all that robust. I will say the cams are not all that good at at progging prefrontal warm sector supercells that are kind of on the smaller side. So these very well could be supercells. Just again, the question is, will they get intense enough to produce those severe hazards? That remains to be seen. And then we go through the evening and we see that line, the kind of broken line, move through eastern Kentucky and Tennessee. That would be more of a damaging wind risk at that time as well. NSSL WRF, and you see there not much going on. We see cold front gets going by mid-afternoon or so. Not much going on down to the south, a little bit farther south, closer to the coast. Let me switch the sector here. So the NSSL WRF does have a few storms here, trying to make their way inland from the Gulf. Again, not really all that robust, but we do see at least some attempts at convection. All the models are on board with some attempts at updrafts trying to get going. So that is definitely something to watch across that corridor, southeast Mississippi into southern Alabama and southwest Georgia. All the models are on board with some attempts at convective initiation. Again, will they get intense enough? That's the question. And I'll show you the HREF here if it's out. This is, again, that tool I like to use that shows the potential for updraft helicity or updraft rotation based on all of our cams put into an ensemble. And you can see just not a ton of a signal for really robust rotating storms. We see about a 10% probability of storms exceeding that max threshold here, which we won't get into that. But as far as robust updrafts go, a very low probability from the cams of really robust rotating updrafts. Doesn't mean there won't be robust updrafts. Just means the potential for really intense supercells is on the very low side with this setup. You can see not even any contours showing up here in that southern portion of the risk. So definitely a lower end setup today for the reasons that we have discussed. Again, we're about to get a new outlook here in about 20 minutes or so, but for now, I don't expect a lot of changes with it. But for now, the slight risk extends from central Kentucky down into southern and middle Tennessee, Bowling Green, Nashville, Murfreesboro, Franklin, all in that level 2 out of 5 slight risk, and then a marginal risk surrounding that from southern Ohio, eastern Kentucky, West Virginia, western West Virginia, all the way down into Alabama and Georgia. There could be some isolated severe storms there. In the marginal risk up here across eastern Kentucky, southern Ohio, western West Virginia, more of a linear storm mode up there, some line segments with a low-end damaging wind risk. And then down here we could see that low-end supercell risk prevail if updrafts can get going with that low-end tornado and damaging wind risk there. So here are the tornado probabilities for today. Again, those two separate areas along the cold front, Kentucky, Tennessee, and then down there across southern Alabama at 2% for now. Don't expect that to increase all that much given the issues that we've talked about. Damaging wind, 15% within that slight risk area. So that looks to be a main threat today. And then isolated instances of large hail are possible as well. All right, so that's going to wrap things up for this discussion. I will take any questions you all have now. So fire them away in the chat if you have any questions on remember, let's keep them pertaining to this setup alone. I want to make sure people have all the information they need to be safe today. But this setup alone, please. And if you have any other questions, you know where to find me otherwise on socials or by email. Could you do an analysis on today's South Brazil Paraguay setup? Tornadoes are expected. Probably going to I probably don't have too much time to do that today. I do know a friend of mine, Vitor, on Twitter, did a full forecast video in Portuguese on the setup. He did it last night, so I would definitely recommend that you see that if you speak Portuguese. But he did a full breakdown on that last night. And he's from that area, so he kind of knows that well. Yeah, South American threat. There is a threat today there. Let me see if I can pull it up here on Pivotal real quick. Um, yeah. Let me go back to the NAM, or let me go to the GFS here real quick. Continental, South America. So there is a bit of a trough swinging through, as I understand it here. You see very active jet stream down there across that region for today. A nice looking shortwave there out across that area. And there's a lot of terrain influences as well in this part of the world. You see plenty of moisture as well. Very strong looking moisture. Those blues and purples are going to be your favorable areas for your overlap of that trough with some instability. You see, doesn't look super favorable, but certainly tornadoes would be a threat there. As far as I understand it, I haven't really taken a look at that setup, but if you want to see more on that, I would highly recommend checking out Vitor's video. I'll actually pull it up for you if I can on Twitter. So he did a full breakdown on this today. And there's his video there if you want to check that out, if you speak Portuguese. But yeah, that looks to be the best source for you on that, for that setup. Any other questions for today? From looking at these models, unless I'm looking at some of them wrong, does this look to be more of an anticyclonic tornado setup if they happen? So you can't really, you wouldn't really be able to forecast that too much ahead of time. There certainly is a bit of cyclonic curvature in the hodograph, the nice meat hook shape in the hodograph. So not really going to be something that you would forecast, but I don't really see an overall risk for anticyclonic tornadoes today. Should we assume a very low risk of tornado and hail in the Dixie setup? Yeah, hail is probably not going to be a huge issue down there, given how small those updrafts are expected to be. And so I would say the threat for the southeast is going to be a brief tornado here or there, and maybe an isolated damaging wind gust or two, maybe an isolated instance of large hail. But if any storms can get developing or can get intense down there, it would be a damaging wind and isolated tornado risk. Any other questions? Any other questions at all on today's setup? Again, we do have another setup coming in a couple of days. Their marginal risk for now, they do mention possibly upgrading to a slight risk being inserted later. But for now, this is for Sunday, November 9th, marginal risk out from Eastern Virginia all the way down into Florida. We'll monitor that setup, and we may be back if that setup becomes a little bit more potent than expected. Do you think today is 5% worthy? I do not. I think the 2% is more than adequate. We'll get another update here in 15-20 minutes from the SPC, but I don't think they will go 5%, just given some of the issues that we've talked about in the forecast for today. Anything else at all on today's setup? Yeah, from what I've seen, it is a pretty impressive setup for Brazilian standards. That trough looks pretty impressive with pretty impressive moisture. So yeah. Thanks for the kind words, Jeff. Always appreciate your support. Thanks for the kind words, everybody who sent them in the chat today. Always appreciate your support and your viewership. Definitely is a good motivating factor for me to keep getting the content up here on the channel. Again, we'll have more videos coming up as far as breakdowns go from 2025, some late April stuff, and then we'll go into the mid-May stuff, and then June. North Alabama looking again, low-end risk. You're kind of stuck in the middle, so I don't suspect there's going to be as high of a risk there. I think you'll see the highest coverage of storms out across the slight risk areas and areas north, and then down in southern Alabama if anything can go. But I would keep an eye out in northern Alabama, low-end risk for an isolated severe storm or two. No, I don't think it will. I do not think the risk will verify as a 5% risk after it's happened. Yeah, only time will tell. But I don't think we're going to see a lot of tornado reports with today's setup. I honestly don't think we're going to see a ton of severe weather reports overall, given the nature of the thermos and the kinematics, but I expect a few damaging wind, maybe some large hail reports, and maybe a tornado or two somewhere, but I don't think that's going to be the biggest hazard with this setup. The setup really never looked all that good a few days ago to me. It's always had these issues. So it really hasn't changed a whole lot in the last few days. Larry, thank you. First time catching the live stream. Going to try to do more of these, as I said, more of these live streams going forward, especially this off season, quote unquote. During the spring, it might be difficult for me, given that I'm busy chasing, doing the tours, etc. So live streams will be tough then, but for now, once during this kind of second season, off season, so to speak, I'm definitely going to try to do more of these live streams. Love the live discussions. Appreciate it. Snow here in central Michigan soon. Yeah, there should be a component of winter weather to this system, especially up in the Great Lakes on the backside of that surface low. All right, any other questions at all? Fire them in the chat. Otherwise, we will wrap this video up. Yeah, so everybody, thank you for watching today. I appreciate you joining, sending comments in the chat. Yeah, appreciate everybody for your viewership and support, as always. So it doesn't look like there are any more questions. Prediction on the upcoming months, November, December. Just quickly on that, it's hard to say. It looks like we may see a pattern flip by mid-November, mid to late November. It looks like we may get a little bit more of an active jet stream, so that is maybe something to watch. Farther out into December, it's unclear, but it looks like we may see a pattern change coming by mid-November. Yep, thanks, Grace. Thanks for sending those Omega plots. Really appreciate it. Day 3 outlook, as I said, low-end risk. We'll monitor that, but we'll see if they add a slight risk, and we may be back with another live video if they do upgrade. We'll see. What do I think of the closure of the Farmer's Almanac? Obviously the forecast accuracy has come into question for years, and it's not a good forecasting tool. But it's nostalgic. The old Farmer's Almanac is still in print, so that's the one that I have. Anytime anyone's gifted me an almanac, it's been the old Farmer's Almanac. That's going to stay in print, but the competitor, the Farmer's Almanac, is going to go away. It's sad to see, but yeah, I might pick up a copy for nostalgia's sake, but all right, so that looks like it's going to be it. Louisville, Kentucky, low-end risk for you today. You're in the marginal risk for today's setup, just outside. You're almost not even in the marginal risk, but low-end risk for a severe storm or two, maybe an isolated damaging wind gust up there. Synoptically, what's 3 key things you look for while generally skimming over models? Especially in the days, several days out, I go to the 500s. I see, do we have a good trough, and do we have moisture, surface moisture, and what's our surface pressure setup looking like? As those will kind of give you a good overview of the overall setup. So 500 millibar trough, surface moisture, where's the surface low, and how is it configured? So, all right. So we'll wrap things up here. Again, if you have any other questions not pertaining to this setup, you can feel free to contact me via email, on social, etc. But that is going to wrap things up for this video today. Thank you all for watching. For those of you in the risk area today, stay safe, have those weather radios handy, and have multiple sources of receiving warnings. Even though we said there are some issues with this setup, and it looks like a lower end setup, still severe weather is a possibility, distinct possibility, and all it takes is one intense storm to ruin your day and give you some issues. So definitely be safe today. Have multiple ways of receiving warnings, and we'll get through this just fine. But everybody, thank you for watching. Thanks for joining. Thanks for the kind words in the chat. Thanks for all the questions, and we will see you next time.